Good morning, everybody. This is Jack McCullough. I am the president of the CFO Leadership Council, and thanks to all of you for joining us this morning. We have a great discussion lined up, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I do want to thank not only all of you for being flexible and giving up a live event for a webinar, but also in particular to our speakers for doing so. I know they had made some plans, and Ronell, in fact, was going to fly in from Toronto. So it's great that you are able to accommodate the change. And I know this is going to be a terrific event. So before we begin, Pamela advised me to, treat this, as if it was a live event. So before we begin, by a show of hands, how many people are attending for the first time? Okay, very funny. Had to go with that. Anyway, I want to give you a few administrative things before we start the program this morning. We have a few great programs coming up. On March 26th, actually, with Profix Software, we have our CFO benchmark webinar, and that will take place the 26th at noon Eastern time. That is based upon a survey we did with 400 CFOs across North America. So I think you'll find that a really interesting program. And then next month in Portland, we're going back to live events, hopefully. And if so, on April 14th, the program will be on creating an award-winning culture. That should be a terrific event. And then for those who don't know, we are doing CFO Week, the week of May 11th through May 15th in Boston, Massachusetts. We partner with MIT Sloan for the week. It's a terrific week. We have a two-day conference on Monday, the 11th, and Tuesday, the 12th. And then Sloan has an exclusive CFO accelerator. Only about 40 CFOs will be attending that one. So it should be a great week. Right now, we are not canceling that program. Things feel good on the ground in Boston. But as you might imagine, we'll continue to monitor that every day as news changes. I also want to take a moment just to thank our Portland chapter sponsors. We have two national sponsors, Bank of America and Oracle NetSuite. In addition, we have Heffernan Insurance, Perkins and Company, Profix, Robert Half, and Stoll Reeves. So thank you all for being supportive of our first year in Portland. It's been a great year, so thanks in large part to you. So a couple of other things before we start the show. If you have questions, hopefully you see a rectangle in your upper right-hand corner. And so if you have questions, simply hit the chat box and type them in, and Pamela will read the questions out loud. Only the speakers and a couple of more people are able to talk right now. In addition, this program is eligible for CPE. To earn CPE, we'll be having some polling questions throughout the program. You will need to answer those questions, and you'll also need to stay until the end. And if so, then if you're a member, we can share with you a CPE certificate. So all of those things out of the way, I want to get off the stage. And it's my pleasure to introduce all of you to the moderator for today's program. It's actually a bit of a milestone for us. It is Dean Cliff Allen. Dean Cliff, is the Dean of the School of Business for Portland State University. And as best we can remember, he's actually the first time we've been honored to have a dean speak on one of our panels. So that's great. And I'm just going to turn it over to you. Thanks very much, Dean.
Thanks, Jack. Appreciate the introduction. So I will probably introduce myself and give you a little bit of a background, and then I'd like to make sure Ronell and Janine have a chance to introduce themselves before we get started. Yes, I'm Dean of the Business School here at Portland State University, but I spent 30 years in the high-tech business. I have an engineering undergrad degree. And in business today, we have to make sure students know what's happening at least 5 years out, because that's when they're going to graduate and start in the business community. And you can imagine with the disruption today, artificial intelligence, machine learning is at the forefront. And so that's why we're so interested in this particular topic and getting our students ready. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Ronell Marbella, Director of Product Strategy at Profix Software.
Great, thanks, Cliff. Hi, everyone. It's Ronell Marbella here. So in terms of background, I am, the Director of Product Strategy at Profix. I am a former engineer who became a business guy. Really, my focus at Profix these days is thinking about the future of corporate performance management, how organizations plan, budget, forecast, and really trying to better understand, obviously emerging customer trends, how those processes are changing, how the market is changing, in understanding new technologies and how they can be applied to that particular class of software. And so really looking forward to engaging with you guys and having a good chat around the future of using AI within software.
Great, thanks, Renell. Janine Taft, VP Digital Health Kinship.
Good morning, everybody. So I have a very different background coming into the conversation around machine learning. So I actually have worked for the last 16 years at Banfield Pet Hospital. I was the chief marketing officer. And about 3 years ago, moved, or 2.5 years ago, moved into a role with the parent company, Mars, in their new division, Kinship, which is really looking at how do we create the future of pet care. So making veterinary care and care for your pets more accessible and more affordable. And one of the areas that I lead is a project we are doing in partnership with Whistle, which is a sort of a Fitbit for your dog. And it is using machine learning to match the accelerometer data that comes off the device on your dog with the medical records from Banfield to really start to give pets a voice and understand what's happening every day when your pet can't talk to you. So a very different application of machine learning.
Great, thanks, Janine. I think everybody could agree we have great panelists today. But I think what I'd do is like to start with a definition of artificial intelligence and machine learning. We're really in more of a general phase today when we think about AI from a high level. Basically, they're machines that have multiple capabilities that act intelligent, that think, perceive, and take action. But in reality, we're in more of a narrow space where AI is concerned when you think about machines based on systems to address repeatable and specific tasks. So we're really in that narrow range today. Think about the general definition about 10 years away. But with that, we have our first polling question. How much time have you spent formulating AI machine learning strategy for your organization?
And this is Pamela. Just wanted to remind everybody, if you have logged in on your phone, unfortunately, you're not able to have the benefit of seeing the screen. But if you have logged in on your computer, please feel free to go ahead and answer some of these questions. I see people are logging in right now, and we're getting some responses. But just to let you know, if you've logged in on your phone, you'll just have a little bit of dead air right here.
You can sing to entertain them.
That's exactly right. Okay. I think we have about 72% of the people that have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close this poll right now. There we go. Cliff, are you able to see those results?
I am actually not able to see the results.
Well, not a problem. So the question was, how much time have you spent formulating an AI and machine learning strategy for your organization? And an overwhelming 65% of the people that are on the call have said little or none time. Well, that doesn't sound right, but they have spent little or none amount of time formulating their strategy. 22% have said just some time, and only 13% have spent a great deal of time, and they are knee deep in their AI strategy right now.
That's actually great, consistent with other polls, perhaps even a little bit higher than what we've seen. So it's actually a positive result, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, those are interesting results. I would ask if either of the panel members have any comments on that. It's interesting to see how many organizations are trying to prepare and understand how AI will affect them moving forward. We're seeing more and more community members in Portland think about how AI will affect them more from a perspective of how much capital can they spend on it and how much will that result in a return on investment, which is difficult to determine at some points.
Yeah, I guess my answer would be from a large organization. There's a lot of ideas around machine learning and AI, and I do believe what can get in the way is trying to calculate the ROI on a large scale project. And so at least our approach was to start small, figure out how we could use it. Did it make a difference? What did it look like? And then it grew over the last 2 years. We've expanded more and taken on additional projects. It really is one of those things that you can throw a whole lot of money against and not have strong results if you haven't been thoughtful. And you can also almost freeze yourself into never taking action at all. So my encouragement for those who are saying there's little to no time for it, how do you take a really small project and look at it, even if that's in partnership with a consulting group or someone else who can show the value to the organization? Because otherwise, I think we did it on paper for a while, probably a year and a half at Mars, where we just could not put our foot in the game because we just on paper couldn't justify the spend until we actually just sort of jumped in and tried it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Pernell here, speaking from the mid-market perspective, where Profix is really focused. When we're talking to our customers about their different their thoughts around AI, their understanding about how that might apply to their business, I would echo the sentiment that a lot of them are starting to think and plan for that future. But I think part of it is there is that gap between the reality of where AI is today and how smart it actually is, and what's kind of shown in popular culture, in the movies, et cetera, right? The technology itself is very narrowly focused, and I think, in terms of recognizing and realizing a value from the application of the technology, it really is about focusing on a specific application that you can try out fairly quickly, see some return, see some benefit, and then that really almost forms the basis for the development of that strategy going forward. You can now start to, once you've recognized that value, seen some of that value, start to think about other applications where you can bring some of the AI technologies to bear. And I think that really creates that snowball effect within the organization to help the adoption, the visioning, the planning for that future of application of the technology.
Thanks to both of you for that. In the spirit of this, under the how should an organization begin its AI journey, Janine, I'd like to ask you a question. You spoke to this a little bit, but in your experience in Mars, which is a relatively sizable company, how do you implement AI into a large organization, and then from a leadership perspective, overcome resistance to machine learning?
Yeah, we spoke about starting small, but this was an interesting project because there were multiple factoids, right? It was sort of Mars's maybe first venture, at least in the pet care side, into machine learning. Some of the other parts of the organization had done some machine learning projects, but they were kind of done in a vacuum with universities, and then sort of the results were presented to the organization. And in a weird way, that created fear because everybody was sort of like, well, how did they come to this? How do we know it was right? So I guess the good news for Mars, we had done it wrong a couple times. And so with this project, we immediately sat down with veterinarians, right? So this project is about helping veterinarians better care for your pet. And so one of the things we did is just, held sort of sessions with the veterinarians to say, what are pain points for you? And one of the clear and loudest pain points for them is that pet owners come in for a checkup and they ask for like a download of what's been going on with your pet. And most pet owners are not particularly good about telling what's been going on with their pet. In fact, I can say that I was one of those pet owners who came in with their dog. And, they said, has he been eating the same? Any changes in the pattern? My answer was, yep, everything's been fine. No issues. Breast's a little stinky, think it could be might need a dental. And he needed 7 teeth removed. And when, after the fact, I sat and thought about my dog, who was one who would always eat from the bowl and eat everything in the bowl, he had been eating a little bit, walking away, eating a little bit, walking away, and the realization of, oh my God, his teeth were hurting him. And I didn't notice that. So what we found is a pain point for the veterinarians, which is pets can't tell us what's going on. How do we bring data and information back to the veterinarian to make it smarter? And then we involve them in every phase of the project. So as we were designing it, as we were starting to see some results, we have a veterinarian who's a core part of the team to make sure she's always looking at it from the point of view of how will a veterinarian perceive this data, right? Because the data scientists get super excited and think they've found something, and the data, the veterinarian who's very science-based is always the first one to go, that's really nice. However, we need to go further. This doesn't really tell us anything. This is normal behavior on a pet. So it was really involving the group that was going to be impacted by the end result and starting small and building momentum. So we now have veterinarians going, what new things are you guys finding? What are you working on next? They're now proactively asking us to continue on the project. Whereas in the beginning, there was a lot of resistance that a machine could tell them anything that they couldn't understand by touching and feeling the pet. So start with a pain point for your audience, start small and engage them throughout.
Thank you. That's I just love that use case around pets and Fitbit and data. That's really great. Ronell, do you have anything to add about this change management around machine learning?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, we've obviously been talking to our customers about how they think they might be able to apply machine learning technology to their business. And I think, the area that, we've kind of identified with them, jointly with them, is really particularly around forecasting, really trying to make sense of the volumes of data that they're gathering within the organization, and really trying to surface the trends and the key implications from that data to help them to better plan. And, as much as the machine can go and figure out and identify and surface those trends and insights, ultimately that still needs to be paired with the insight of the business, the insight of the people who run the business, who live and breathe that business day to day. I think as much as, the technology can process, those large volumes of data very quickly and efficiently, there is still that nuance in what's happening in a particular market or a particular business. And I think that's where, the technology isn't to the point where it can pick that up today. That's not to say that, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, the technology will get smarter. But I think at this point, it really is a partnership with the business to make sure that the technology becomes an enhancement to what they do rather than a replacement, because it can't replace today.
Yeah, thanks for that. I would add from a university standpoint, since we're partnerships with the city, we have often multiple stakeholders that are involved with things around technology like machine learning and artificial intelligence. Just for instance, we have a large manufacturer and designer of trucks in town, and they're developing autonomous vehicles as we speak. But they need access to the streets to have their machines actually learn about perceptions of what they can see and can't see. And so access to the streets means actually having citizens be okay with autonomous vehicles on the street testing. So that creates some angst. And so understanding how we work through change management with multiple stakeholders has kind of been our interest as of late. So that leads us to polling question number 2.
Here we go.
Okay, what is the level of resistance within your organization with implementation of machine learning?
Okay, we've got people voting. We've got about 30%, 40% voting right now. It looks like, boy, people are really jumping on. Bravo, you guys. I'll just hold on for another few seconds and then we'll close the poll and see what our final results are. So the question is, what is the level of resistance against machine learning implementation within your own organization? And I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. 68% have voted. And it looks like the level of resistance, we have 17% that are saying the resistance is high. The struggle is real. We've got 30% saying it's moderate. It's more resistance than I want, but it's moderate. 39% are not really feeling much resistance, very low resistance, and just 13% are feeling no resistance.
That's another one that's positive, relatively speaking. I mean, over half that means they're feeling little or none, which is surprising in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. So Janine, you said start small. Do you think that plays into that response rate that we saw?
I think it probably does. I think you also won't discover the resistance necessarily until you begin. So in the veterinary world, veterinarians tend to be skeptical. So they were loud and clear with their resistance. But what we found was there was a lot more than we thought once we started the project. And so we needed to gain some momentum to bring them over. So when we shared the first results, everybody was sort of like, okay, we're glad you're doing this. But when we shared the first results, there was a lot of skepticism of the results. And then we had to keep proving ourselves. So I think the starting small is a really good way to kind of prove it, get their feedback, and really also uncover those buried resistors. Because if you go with a big project, and actually Mars did that. We did a huge machine learning project with the University of Davis in California, and did not involve the veterinarians in the project, and they really did not believe the results. And it took almost 3 years to implement the results of the learning, and the learning was right. And it took 3 years to get the veterinarians the results and implement it into their practice, and it's still moving very slowly. So if they're not engaged, they just don't feel part of the results or believe what they see. So there's hidden resistors as well, not to scare anybody who's saying there's no resistance in their organization.
Thanks, Janine. Ronell, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say around some of the AI technology, specifically around machine learning, a lot of the work that organizations are doing around machine learning, building forecast models, what have you, today, it's kind of a black box. You hire a data scientist, you've got a black box model that isn't necessarily understandable to the users, the business users of the system. And I think, to some degree that does create resistance, because ultimately, especially when we're talking about the Office of Finance, the financial analysts who run the analysis today for the organization, that is what they do. That's where their expertise lies. And so there is that little bit of a mistrust against what the model is spitting out and what the machine is telling you to do, or the trend that it's identified. And I think part of overcoming that resistance is making that process, that learning process, the model process, a bit more transparent, right? And getting their buy-in that way, so that they learn to trust the outputs and the recommendations from the model, and are able to now feel more confident in not only using it, but also making it available to the rest of the organization. So I think it's a big part of it is just transparency around how it's done and how the AI works.
Yeah, thank you, Ronell. I think we often see this kind of distribution on things that are disruptors in our business, and yet we have to embrace it and invest in it. And so again, difficulty on establishing ROI, and therefore difficulty to hop on board with the change. We even see that from the financial community, as far as capital expense is always something that's not exciting to CFOs. So we see that play out in all kinds of the parts of the organization. So under the how can we use AI to drive business value without losing focus on what needs to be done today? Ronell, how do you see it out there in the business community? Are they constantly looking forward to technologies like this, or are you seeing somewhat resistance to that?
I think it almost depends on where an organization is in their, I'll call it their maturity cycle with respect to adoption of technology. There are some organizations who've kind of embraced, organizational systems, so ERP systems, CRM systems, and they have recognized the value of it. And then there are others who are kind of a little earlier in the game. They're doing a lot of things manually. They're using, at least in the finance context, Excel for a lot of things. and so they haven't necessarily taken that first step towards greater automation, greater intelligence in their systems. And that's, I think, the level of resistance you see is a bit different depending on the group. When I think about our space and the applications that our CFO customers and prospects have identified as being potential areas for application, really I think it falls into 3 areas, and it's really a continuum. The stuff that is fairly basic, fairly transactional today, all the way to more of the value creation role, which is where the CFO's role is really increasingly focused. So really focusing on supporting the strategic decision making of the organization. A simple example on the more transactional tactical role is something like RPA, which is robotic process automation. And a lot of these systems are rules-based today, but they're starting to incorporate AI technology and natural language processing technology to process non-structured data. So for example, an invoice might come in and you can pick up the number and the vendor fairly quickly using some basic technology, but there's other structured data in that document that NL technology can process and make useful. So that's an application where today the manual processing of those documents takes a lot of time and effort and is prone to error. Introducing a technology to make that smarter is an easy ROI. And then when you kind of move down the path, we talked about some of the machine learning side of things, where supporting scenario analysis, what if modeling when you're doing your planning and forecasting. You can use machine learning technology to do that more efficiently, more effectively, but I think there is that it is a longer term approach, and you need to make a longer term investment in that in order to see the value.
Janine, do you have any comments about that?
No, I think Ronell handled that incredibly well.
Okay. Going back to Ronell, what are some of the specific ways that CFOs can apply AI-powered solutions to help reinvent their role within their organization and help drive it forward?
Sure. Another one I can think of is around risk management. So, for example, the application of AI technology to handle anomaly detection, to understand patterns, whether it be, catching errors at the transactional level, looking at, potentially vendor invoices that are potentially coming in that are, either coded incorrectly or potentially fraudulent in some cases. But also looking at, patterns in data, picking out particular products that are trending downwards and understanding the reasons why they're trending downwards, and really being able to correct that performance proactively. Those are some specific areas that our customers have asked us about to see if we had we were looking at, because it was a particular area of pain. Like if you think about the process of financial flows and the review that financial analysts will go through to review a specific set of accounts and transactions, to make sure that the data coming in to financial reporting is good and solid. It's a heavily manual process. It takes multiple days of time, and you're not covering every single transaction. Applying AI technology, anomaly detection technology can do that, and you can get a risk score on every single transaction in a matter of minutes. And so that really changes the game for the Office of Finance, and allows those financial analysts who are formerly focused on that to focus their creative energy, their time, their effort on thinking of ways to grow the business. So all of a sudden it's a time shift and a focus shift. So the Office of Finance becomes more strategic in their thinking and their outlook and their application of their analytical horsepower.
I would actually echo Ronell. So there was a project that a fellow colleague worked on for Banfield that was fascinating. So I'd worked there for 16 years, and our biggest limiter is time for our veterinarians and staff in the hospital. There's always more demand than there is time of our veterinarians. And the interesting projects that was done with machine learning, and this was actually sponsored by the CFO. So one of the ways that the CFO can play a bigger role is to really understand those pain points within the organization. We haven't been able to either figure out through traditional methodology, or just the financial analysts didn't have time to look at it. So one of the factors that in the hospital is missed appointments. So people schedule their appointments 6 months in advance for their checkup or for a dental, and things happen, life happens, and people miss those appointments. And they actually did a risk model through machine learning and came up with scores for clients and appointment types, so that when the veterinarian the day before saw the appointments for the next day, they could see, you know what, 50% of our appointments are actually at a high risk for being canceled. And with that, they could prioritize their calls to sort of confirm the appointments with the client or to overbook appointment times during those times. And it was a huge win, and they took missed appointments from almost 35% down to about 12%. And it required both machine learning and physical people in the hospital to then action upon those learnings. But again, sponsored by the CFO, by identifying a very specific pain point within the organization, and then really being the champion of the results and activating those results.
Yeah, that's interesting. We often see this application in supply chain or in distribution centers, et cetera. And we've seen when there's a balance of robotics and human activity, the supervisors in those facilities actually change their behavior, if you will, because you can't have cadence of the machine necessarily dictate the cadence of human work. And so there has to be a balance there that isn't normally there when you have just humans or just machines.
No, I mean, I think it absolutely is. I totally agree with that statement. I think, you know, the application of these advanced technologies is as an augmentation of human ability and capability, right? It really allows the humans to focus their time, their effort to the more creative work that humans are great at, and let the machines handle the heavy lifting of processing data and scrubbing data and analyzing data, and really allowing the humans to focus on the things that are exceptions and that we should pay attention to for further analysis, interpretation, and insight, right?
Yeah, definitely. Janine, I'd like to throw this next question to you. How can you leverage AI to speed innovation and drive new science?
Yeah, so obviously this project is a great example of it, but because probably no one else on the call is in veterinary medicine or pet care, I'll focus on it more generally for speeding innovation. When I look at the spectrum of innovation, there's sort of 3 ways that we look at innovation at Mars Pet Care. It's a very traditional model, but there's kind of core innovation. So the missed appointment example is a use of machine learning that really drives the core business as it exists today and creating efficiencies in the business. That's where I see the CFO playing a really strong role in partnering there. What are some of the big questions we haven't been able to answer? What are some of those big challenges? But interestingly, most organizations spend the majority of their time on that innovation to the core. So it's business efficiencies. How do we drive our labor more effectively? The supply chain you talked about, that's another great use case at a place that Mars has done a significant amount in their supply chain management. But where organizations get caught up is their day-to-day business requires them to focus on the core. And then what starts to happen is they're not looking at the adjacent business models where they could potentially step into and utilize some of the things they're already doing to empower and go further. Or the third bucket, which is truly transformational change for the organization. And within an organization, it's really hard to do that spectrum of innovation and still continue to run a strong and profitable business. And the way we've kind of applied AI in the pet care side is to really start outward at the transformational circle, the one that most organizations, it's 5 years to 10 years out, don't have the time to look at. And we've really been applying it outward and then bringing it into the core So looking at things that could be completely transformational, like when we started this project, we had no idea if we'd be able to prove anything. We didn't know if we could train the accelerometer to find, health conditions or alert you to things going on with your pet. But we took a bet out in that kind of never land and said, let's do this. And no, in the core business, you'd never be able to put your people. You could never take 3, 4, 5 analysts and put them on those problems that are 5 years out. And using machine learning to look at that and start small, we were like, you know what, we are finding some things. How do we put more resources? And then how do we pull that transformational innovation back into business faster? And so it allowed us to spend time in a place that no one would ever have been able to do if we didn't use machine learning to do it, and then bring it backwards. And that also engaged the organization. So the people who, were the financial analysts, how do we now monetize that learning? How can we charge more for this? So we have wellness plans at Banfield that allow you to get all the care you need for a pet. If we have a whistle device and we can actually alert you that your pet needs to come into the veterinarian, can we charge more for our wellness plan, or frankly charge less because they're coming in more frequently? What does it do to our pricing model? So we used AI to really accelerate the transformational learning, and then we used our business partners to figure out how to bring that innovation of the future into the core business of today.
Great, thank you. Ronell, do you have anything to say about AI speed to innovation and driving new science?
Yeah, so I think not specific on the science, but in terms of speeding innovation, I think, one of the powers of some of this enabling technology is just pushing, being able to democratize insight, right? And what I mean by that is really, making the insight from data more accessible to more people across the organization. So if you think about how you get access to insight from data today, someone has to process that data, turn it into a visual or a narrative, and distribute that insight, make it accessible to people down within the organization. With technologies such as, AI and machine learning and natural language processing, you can now, and this is in the early stages, but I think, a couple of years down the track, just like you can ask your Google Home or Alexa questions today, those are fairly simple questions, factual type questions. What happened? What temperature is it? What have you? In the future, this type of technology unlocks deeper insight. So all of a sudden, you're now able to ask questions as to what happened, and to have the machine explain the reasons for something happening. And all of a sudden, by making that insight accessible to people down on the production floor, people out in the field, people who are working with customers day to day, all of a sudden you can more quickly make improvements, enhancements, identify new areas of opportunity for the organization that can potentially bubble up, right? So the speed to insight and innovation just becomes quicker. So rather than it being pushed down from the top, from the analysis team who's trying to identify opportunities, those opportunities have the potential and greater potential to kind of bubble up from the people who are living and breathing the day-to-day.
I think that's a really interesting point, Ronell. And what we see with this project and some of the other things we've done is exactly that, is that we find an insight or some piece of information
Right.
using AI, and then suddenly you put that in the hands of the people who are working every day, and they go, oh, this actually has application in this other way that frankly a machine will never think about.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you take those innovations and they create more and more insights and innovation as well.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's, once you can take the cognitive load off people to try to find and process data to get an insight, all of a sudden they can apply that cognitive energy to the creative side of things, applying that insight, generating additional insight. And it's a virtuous cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. In my experience at the university, What we're starting to see companies struggle with, though, in the development of innovation and new science is with the multiple disruptors of technology in their businesses. So for instance, how do I manage my supply chain learning using more and more AI? And by the way, I now have to start thinking about using blockchain because I need transparency in my supply chain. So how do I implement blockchain at the same time I'm trying to implement AI? And that's when it gets really confusing for them.
Yeah, I think the speed of technology change is something that for every organization is mind-bogglingly hard. And you're right, if you're applying machine learning to, we had that, we were building a data lake, so pulling Mars in general holds their data within each business. So Banfield has their own data warehouse, Royal Canin has their own, all of the brands within pet care, and trying to put that all into one data lake at the same time we were doing a machine learning project. As each of the businesses was evolving and putting some new finance software in, and also looking at, so it's that no matter what you're doing, it's really hard because you're constantly keeping up with the pace of technology change.
Yeah, for sure. And that leads us to the next question, if you will. Where can AI be dangerous and erode value?
Yeah, I mean, I can start, and I would say that if not done well, so I think Ronell made a really good point about how do you begin in an organization. I'm actually a believer that creating a partnership, the first AI that you work on, maybe needs to be with an external party, with people from your organization heavily involved in the project, because I think where it is dangerous and can erode value, and we saw this, is with somebody who maybe is not an expert, who wants to learn but is trying to use it in a different way. And it's that old adage you hear, data when tortured will confess to anything. So we had a really large project that was around efficiency in our hospital. We had someone in our team who did a whole bunch of analysis and came up with a hypothesis. We tested it in some hospitals, and there was almost too much invested from the operations group who had run the machine learning project to prove that their data was right. And so when the pilot was done in 1 or 2 hospitals, they handheld it and showed the value. And it got kind of spoken the chain to the leaders that be at Mars Pet Care that this was a $50 million opportunity. And then when we tried to roll it out across the hospital chains, actually found some significant flaws in the machine learning. Luckily, we stopped that after we tested it in 2 markets and didn't see the same results. But it's a really good example of where within your own business, you become in love with what you found and you want to prove it. And then maybe it's not telling you what you think it's telling you. So sometimes having external point of view on that. I will also say we've done lots of projects with big consulting groups where you don't have enough engagement of the core business. So we've done lots of work with McKinsey and Bain, who are amazing organizations. But again, if you don't have a core group internal who really understands the data and the operations, they can also make just as wrong analysis coming out of those types of projects.
Nell, do you have anything to comment about that?
No, I mean, I think I would agree wholeheartedly. I liked your quote, Janine. Data, when tortured, will tell any story you want it to. And that's exactly it, right? Because a lot of these technologies rely on data for the learning, for the training, in order to model, the interrelationships, in order to come up with an outcome. And ultimately, the data is coming from the organization. So if they're too invested in a particular outcome or have a certain bias, or their data already has a bias towards a certain outcome, the model will reinforce that bias. And I think bringing a critical view to that, having potentially an external party, but also making sure that you're continually looking at what other factors might be available, what other data might be available to perhaps strengthen that model and actually help it to provide a more accurate picture or a more accurate prediction, will hopefully help prevent some of the dangerous outcomes that might happen.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right, because when we went back and redid the analytics, what was discovered is that the operations team had really input into the system operational data, which obviously is the data they look at every day, which created their own bias around what was going to happen. And what we decided is we needed to actually pull in the personnel data to look at retention of doctors, retention of nurses, what other dynamics were happening in the hospital, as well as wellness plan retention and retention of clients. And suddenly there was a very different picture that came out that was basically our entire business model is we really need to keep our veterinarians, because as soon as they leave, they take their clients with them, which is not a huge learning. But if you didn't put that data in there, it looked like there were a whole lot of other factors that were driving it and made the veterinarian seem most critical. And as soon as you put the retention data in, you're like, oh, there you go, doctor left, there go 1,000 clients. So.
Yeah, and actually maybe to spin it, I love that example. I mean, maybe to spin it, I think, you know, going down the AI journey or the machine learning journey has actually, you know, when we worked with our first couple of customers on it, it's actually been very eye-opening for them in terms of driving a little bit of even a better understanding of the business than they already had, because they did start to uncover some of these other factors, some of these other data points that were impacting their performance. And, you know, by going through the exercise, seeking out the data, understanding the relationships, ultimately they ended up with a better understanding of how to run their business. So it was kind of a nice side benefit to that project.
Well, that it actually, even more than you can know, because our field leaders in general would go into the hospital and talk numbers to our doctors and talk about their productivity and need to drive, you know, you have to see 15 pets a day. And frankly, veterinarians are not at all motivated by financial performance. And that behavior was driving us to lose veterinarians. So it required us to really rethink and retrain how we worked with our field leaders to really engage and keep our hospital teams kind of loyal to the practice and wanting to stay with us. And interestingly enough, this project, which is sort of an adjunct and completely different, is actually far more energizing to them because it's improving science and improving care for pets, which is what actually lights the heart of a veterinarian, not the financial performance of their hospital.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I would add, you know, Ronell, you brought up the language processing earlier. Under the guise of bots and language processing, we've already seen or experienced, all of us, the frustration of trying to order prescriptions online using a bot on the other end, where they can't understand when we try to pronounce our prescription medicine. You know, that's eroding value as far as clients are concerned. But also, when it becomes dangerous, I know at a company that I worked for before I entered academics, we were tasked with creating language processing and recognition in a defense contracting application where we would use language processing to actually release weapons in a Humvee. Wow. What we discovered was that 18-year-old young people have different voice inflections when they're under stress than when they're actually in a lab.
Right.
And so it became almost dangerous to try to use that application if you didn't have the right processing. So it definitely is only as good as what you put into it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think it's one of those things where, as you know, as folks in the technology space, you know, you're obviously excited about your new application and some cool new applications that you've released. You know, a big challenge with that, especially when adoption you're kind of in the early phases of adoption, is really making sure that you set a great experience with it when you come out with that product. And I think to your point, in certain applications, the consequence of a suboptimal experience are pretty grave in the case of the releasing missiles. But even, you know, when you talk about adoption of the technology, especially when there is potential for that technology to truly make a difference, the bar that you need to meet in terms of that, the performance, the naturalness of that application is pretty high, because customers will only give you one chance, right? They'll try a couple things, and if it doesn't recognize your asks or your inquiries in the first couple of tries, they will stop using it, and you have to win their trust back somewhere down the track. And so as technology forward firm, you always have to remember that human element, right? Like it's not just about the technology. You need people to adopt it, otherwise the product doesn't really exist.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that brings us to our third polling question.
Yes, it does. And then also, Cliff, I have a couple of questions from the audience. So I think we'll move forward with this polling question. And then after we're done with those results, would love to pose a few of the audience questions to you.
Okay, great.
Okay, so here is your next polling question. Go right ahead.
In the next 24 months, how much of the current CFO role will be automated through the implementation of AI technologies?
Okay, people are starting to vote. We've got about 40% voting so far. For those of you that have dialed in, the question is, in the next 24 months, how much of the current CFO role will be automated through the implementation of AI technologies? People very quickly voted. We're at 70%. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And very interesting. So our answers here, at the top of the list, virtually all, that was only 4%. Partially was at 35%. Minimally was at 39%. And then 22% of you felt that none of the CFO role will change. It will remain intact.
Interesting.
I want the job with the guy that's going to be on the beach.
That's only 4%, Jack.
That's the smarter 4%.
Right.
I think that distribution is pretty normal. I mean, it's a classic normal curve. I don't know if, Janine, do you have anything to say about, some people say partially some process will be automated? Pretty significant number.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the numbers reflect the first slide, which was about how much time have you spent thinking about the change in your organization or AI. I think the more time you spend, I think you either can say, based on our organization, there will be very few changes in the next couple of years, right? In the next 24 months, we just don't have the ability to implement even if we wanted to, or partially, like we're gonna start small and see what happens. I was surprised 22% said no, none. Because even if you don't believe machine learning will fundamentally shift the duties of a CFO, your role is still sort of there. You're going to be impacted in some way because teams below you or learnings below you or insights coming from machine learning will change the way you think about your analyst roles, et cetera. So I find the none was surprising to me. The middle two seemed about right. I too would like the one where I'll be working remotely from a beach. Sad to say that before.
Very good. Very
Renell, do you have anything to add to this distribution?
No, I mean, I think again the results are fairly consistent with the data that we've kind of gotten back from conversations with our both customer base but also prospect base. I mean, I think I would agree with the comment about the none seems a little high, but I mean the change I think is really an opportunity, right? Because all of a sudden if the CFO and their organization are less focused on kind of the tactical type stuff, they're able to shift the cognitive load and focus on the future a little bit more. So, I would have, I think what the opportunity we see is really a positive one in terms of being able to better look towards the future. So.
Yeah, I would just answer this by saying, take a really simple example of a company that manufactures stuff. think about the fact that AI would allow you to have a process where defects caused by humans in a factory are reduced to almost nothing, which would completely change your warranty expense that you would reserve on an annual basis towards that. So something will change, no doubt, at least in your thought process as you're automating more of your processes. You're going to spend less money.
Hey, Cliff, it's Pamela. We have a question from the audience. The question being, what is the real implication for smaller sub $50 million companies? And is there an ability to participate? Is there an ability to participate with these smaller sub $50 million companies?
Great question. I'll open it up to Janine or Ronell first.
I'm guessing Ronell may be better able to, because he's probably got a wider array of clients versus my experience in a pretty large organization.
Sure. So I can take that and give my perspective. I mean, I think on the smaller end of the scale, it becomes, I think there absolutely is an opportunity to participate. I think the participation has a different structure than it perhaps would be in the mid-market and the higher end of the enterprise market, where, you know, in the mid and enterprise, you know, you probably are of a sufficient size and level of sophistication where, you know, you can hire a data scientist, you can engage with some of the big consulting firms who have a lot of expertise to provide you, you know, with some guidance on strategy and implementation of specific projects. I think on the smaller end of the scale, the opportunity really is in seeking out, you know, tools, specific tools and specific applications that have AI technology embedded in them, and, you know, starting out with those small wins, those applications of some of that technology to solve, you know, a real business problem in the here and now. So I think it really is it becomes a little bit more of a self-service approach, but I think it really is trying to find an application or two that's got some smarts in it from AI, and using that to get those small wins and build some momentum.
Right. I do have another question here. It's Pamela. I do have another question from the audience. I am literally at ground zero with AI implementation and have little support to move forward. So what are the easiest things I can do to get that ball rolling?
Janine, I think you have a good answer for that with your start small strategy.
Yeah, I think it is. Is there a particular, if you were at least able to hire, right? So you've got somebody on your team or the data organized. So I think the first two steps we did is making sure we had a data set that we felt comfortable with, that we had vetted with the veterinarians. We had worked with Whistle to get their data to a place that, you know, it could be utilized. So making sure your data's in a good place and that you've got, you know, one person who knows what they're doing and can kind of work with the machine learning tools, and then start small, prove something, find that you're trying to solve for, use machine learning to give you solve your pain point in that first small project, but it might give you an insight that you can then leverage and kind of snowball with. That tends to be the best way to then get others on board and begin to support and see the value. Because it is, everybody sort of calls it a big, oh, everybody's talking about machine learning and AI. What does it really mean and how is it going to help my organization? So as soon as you can, you know, hold up a flag of, hey, here's a proof point of the insight we got that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise, it does start to snowball the support for your work.
Fantastic. I do have another question that I'll lob in here that will just kind of go along with that. My team is addicted to spreadsheets.
That's awesome.
How do we get them to leave a tool to their minds is very effective?
You know, I'm going to say that I am not a finance person. So when you say I'm addicted to spreadsheets, that just is so foreign to my brain. I think it is always hard to change management is your hardest part of any implementation of a new technology, right? Whether that's moving, we're right now talking about moving off of sort of some of the Microsoft tools into the Google suites, and you would think we were, creating anarchy in the organization. People like Excel and they like PowerPoint slide, they don't want to move to slides. I think change management is really, really hard. And I think the only way you can do that is start small, let them validate. What I will say is our finance team at Banfield used their spreadsheets to kind of look at and analyze what came out of the machine learning and say, hey, you know what, there might be something here. So let them kind of use their tools to kind of get comfortable with the machine learning tools, and then at some point you kind of have to rip the Band-Aid off. I have become a Slack user. I use Google Drive. I use Google Slides, and I am a PowerPoint junkie, so it was really hard for me to move off it. And at some point, the organization does just need to rip the Band-Aid and get people comfortable, because otherwise they'll cling to those same tools forever. I would tell you, I would never thought I would have given up PowerPoint.
Great. All right, Cliff, if you want to move on to another panel question, I can save these other audience questions for the end.
Okay. Our next question, I think, is one that everybody's wondering. One of the main concerns around AI is that it will replace jobs. What does this mean for the organization as a whole, and specifically for the Office of Finance? Brunel, you want to take that one first?
Sure, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, when you think about the concern around job replacement, replacement of humans across, all areas of the organization, I mean, that typically follows from the introduction of new technology. We saw it with, at least in finance, we saw it with, accounting systems and ERP systems, general ledger systems. We're seeing it again with AI. I think in the end, what it really is the as much as some roles will disappear, a lot of roles will change and evolve. And I think, they will change and evolve in response to the technology and what technology can do. So if you kind of go back to, accounting systems, ERP systems, they record transactions. So rather than someone recording transactions in a ledger, a physical ledger book, now it's done in a computer, in a system. And with the application of AI, the financial analyst role will change from being focused on sourcing data, processing data, analyzing data, to more interpreting data and coming up with scenarios and making recommendations for the future. So, I mean, I think as much as some roles will go away, the roles will change, and I think it really is an opportunity. It creates opportunity for the technology to enhance what people can do. It really is a message of augmentation, I think, in my mind, as opposed to like true replacement.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think, it's a challenge that organizations are facing constantly with the speed of evolution of technology. So whether it's machine learning or new software systems, or just sort of the changing consumer demands, right? In marketing, it's, the millennial consumer and Gen X consumer are very different than my generation or the baby boomer generation. And so in every job, you're constantly needing to learn new skills. I think what's changing is the speed at which that is happening. And so the more you can get in front of that as a CFO and think about how do you upskill your teams, how do you get them prepared for it, the better prepared your organization will be for the impact that it has. But yeah, I think it's something, weirdly, because it's a machine doing the work, there's more fear about that, but I don't think it's any different than every type of change that's happening in our world, and the speed of change that's happening just is sort of creating this need for organizations to really embrace upskilling and retraining associates for the changing world.
Yeah, I would just add to that a little bit about when I think about autonomous driving and autonomous trucks. I think what happens is the business fundamentally pivot. There's no longer going to be a need for a truck driver in every vehicle going up and down the freeway. But what happens is the last mile delivery becomes extremely complex. And how do we develop value added through that particular process where humans do have to participate and then participate in a more accelerated way while the machines are doing things also accelerated. So, you know, there's no doubt that it displaces people, but I think it does create new opportunities. So that leads us to our polling question number 4.
You know what, Dean, I'm going to lob a couple more audience questions at you. So Dean, Cliff, and Janine and Renelle, here we go. Here's one. AI has scary connotations. A lot of people hear AI and they think of the Terminator movies. This creates unique cultural challenges. Is there any advice on that?
It is funny, isn't it? You think of Arnold and I'll be back. Yeah, I think it's just make it as human as possible. So don't talk about, we don't actually talk about the Pet Insight project as a machine learning project. We just call it the Pet Insight project and giving your pets a voice. So how do you change and focus on what is it you're trying to achieve with the machine learning problem? And then talk about it that way. Don't talk about it as an AI project. That's at least what we've done in our organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would echo that comment. It's about humanizing the experience with software, to my mind, right? So we call our AI solution the virtual financial analyst. And when you talk about how the interaction works and the types of things that you can ask your virtual financial analyst to do or to help you with, it's just like all of the questions that you ask your human financial analyst, right? And we're building the experience to be similar. We're building the capability to be similar. So, all of a sudden it stops becoming, less scary, or as it stops becoming a technology solution and just a natural way of interacting with software the way you would with your human financial analyst.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I really like that. We need to humanize the technology. I think that is the key. That is a key phrase right there. Fantastic. Cliff, do you have anything to add to that?
The only thing I would add is that we are so far away from having robots.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Cliff, did we lose you?
Yeah, someone's drilling in the back of my building, so I'm sorry.
Oh, got it. Okay.
What I would say is that, the idea of, for instance, a UPS truck being driven by a robot and then actually carrying a package to your door and getting your signature is, it's so complex, it's hard to even imagine us being there in the next 50 to 60 years.
Right. That's very true. Here's another question for you, the three of you. Big data is a beautiful thing, but sometimes CFOs say there's too much data. You can spend all your time analyzing endless data, but never really make a decision or take action. So how do I use AI to make decision-making easier and not harder?
Ironically, I would say that question actually is exactly how you should use machine learning, because you have so much data available to you. Like we talked about, it can narrow and say, here's an insight, and then you can use that insight to really engage your human analyst to say, hey, there's something here, we should go deeper. And then you're focusing and know exactly what you can action upon. So use the machine learning to take all that big data and come up with the 3 or 4 really interesting findings, and then really dive in on those findings and implement against those. It should be a support system to help you really narrow your focus and know where to look.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think in the end, machine learning technology, AI technology allows you to isolate the signal from the noise, right? So when you talk about data, there's lots of it. There's too much of it from hundreds of different sources. It's trying to identify the insights from that data, the things that you should pay attention to, and being able to do that quickly. And, computing technology, AI technology allows you to do that automatically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add, it goes back to the question about my people love their spreadsheets. I just think that what it does is it doesn't take the spreadsheet away. What it does is it puts it into more of a three-dimensional visualization tool,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can look at the data and actually do something prescriptive from it. Otherwise, you won't be able to sit through all the data on your old Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Let's see, we're sitting here at 9:12. I've got one more question from the audience, and I'm going to lob it out to you right now. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. Here we go. AI is already causing the loss of low-level positions, and basic jobs are being automated. This is an improvement, but has negative cultural consequences. Is there any advice for dealing with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is definitely a hard question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as this country has evolved, it's something we have maybe not paid as close attention to as we could have or should have over the years. So is machine learning the next manufacturing, right? So many manufacturing jobs lost to other countries. And I hope that's not the case. I do hope that as whether we solve this at an organizational level, I will say what Mars is doing is a lot of training programs. So taking those individuals and training them up into other types of positions. And that's easier in a large organization than it is in a small one. And so I do think it's a real problem. I'm not sure I have an answer for it, but as I was talking about upskilling, that's exactly where my brain went to, is that, there's not everybody has the capacity to take that on or learn new things. And so how do we help those individuals? And I'm not sure I have a good answer for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I guess I can jump in here if that's okay. I think I agree with Janine. There is no easy answer for this.
Mm-hmm.
There's 8.7 million truck drivers in the country. When you think about them being displaced, where do they go? But there's also a white collar and middle management situation that's going to happen with the tax returns, things like that are all going to be automated.
Mm-hmm.
So no doubt that we have to think through this clearly and understand what we're doing with the technology and how can we help people upscale their skills.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's going to be technology and a fair amount of empathy along with, with any of those conversations on AI. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I encourage the audience to lob any other questions out there, and I'm happy to offer them up. At this point, I don't have any other questions. So if you want to start with the final polling question, Cliff.
Okay, I'll do that. How has your attitude changed regarding AI and machine learning through this presentation today?
All right, we've launched the poll and we're slowly voting. We're up to 33%. How has your attitude changed regarding AI and machine learning through today's panel discussion? I'll keep it open for just a few more minutes so we get to that magical 70%. It's right there. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. Here we go. And I'll share the results so you can see them. How has your attitude changed towards AI and machine learning through today's panel? 24% have said, let's go. I'm jumping off this call and jumping into AI. 62% gives it cause for pause. I'm thinking about AI. 14% have said it's time to go back to work. There's no news here. And then nobody said yuck. And so I think that is positive. So 62% it's cause for pause. They're going to start thinking about AI. Comments about that?
I think it's great. I think that's really exciting. I'm super happy we got no yuck. That would have felt really bad.
No, you can't take that personally though. Yeah, no yuck.
No personal there, but it still would have felt sad. Awesome to see so many people thinking about it, and love that 24% let's go. That's amazing.
Yeah, fantastic.
No, absolutely, very exciting, and I think that's the opportunity there, right? It's to connect the dots, to help folks connect the dots as to some real world applications for this stuff, where they can see real value. And I think it's a journey. It's not a magic bullet. It's a journey that hopefully they will continue to engage on and grow on. That's very exciting.
I would agree about the journey being the key here, and also, when you think about new technologies, I always think about how many use cases are there. And there's so many multiple use cases today around AI that at some point, everybody's going to be jumping on board, even if they're only doing it through their service provider or suppliers. It's going to touch you one way or another.
Fantastic.
Pamela, do you have any more questions from the audience?
That is all the questions. Those are all the questions that oh, nope, I spoke too soon. Please hold 1 second. And okay, I answered that. Oh, okay. I'm gonna read this straight out. You mentioned things like tax returns handled by AI in the future. How do you see people's want or need for person-to-person interaction playing a role in that? And do you think it will delay technologies being adapted? Fantastic question.
Well, I guess I brought that up, so I'll try to answer that. In AI technology space, we talk about there needs to be a human in the loop, as we call it. And so that human in the loop, I think, will just become even more prevalent in the case of client services and walking people through things. Everybody still wants to talk to a person, so that'll still be important. It's just the skill set of that person will be different, especially in a case of things like services like tax returns. Being able to explain the issues around those tax returns is probably going to be more prevalent than actually doing the tax return itself.
Fantastic. Well, actually, it looks like I've cleared the questions, so we are at the end almost here, Cliff.
Okay, I didn't know if any of the panel members wanted to close it out with something that you've heard from the questions or something you'd like someone else in the audience to know. Janine, is there anything else you would like to add for today?
Yeah, I think just that last question is a really interesting one, and I am curious about the pendulum swing, right? Will we have a little bit of a need for high touch customer service in those places where AI has played a role? I see that in Portland with Umpqua Bank, right? So much of banking is via machine now. And they've created this sort of neighborhood bank to bring back that touch and feel of that, and lots of people love it. So I do think there will be some of those high touch customer experiences, and that may be a way we can retrain some of the associates of how to we create that experience with the machine learning.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, I'll kind of go back to my comment about humanizing the experience. A lot of, what's being done today will ultimately get automated and or be powered by AI technology. It will become, a more human experience, but I don't think that's going to completely remove the need for that human interaction. And I think, in a lot of different areas, the human experience that you get is still the one that people prefer. And so it creates opportunity for different human experiences.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would also add that while people are afraid it will automate everything, oddly enough, human beings have a lot more dexterity than any robot can ever have.
Yeah.
And so that dexterity is always going to have a place in all processes.
Sure.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, with that, Jack, I would love to lob it over to you to wrap this up. And let's see if he will do that.
Sorry, I'd forgotten that I'd muted myself. So I know it won't be heard, but a virtual round of applause to our panel. That was fantastic. Thanks so much, for doing the panel to begin with and then adjusting on the fly. And there's there's this odd tradition in the Boston chapter. We've been doing it for years, but for some reason, our members feel like I need to get the feedback in real time. So they actually text me to tell me if the program's going well while the program is still going on. And 3 or 4 Bostonians apparently jumped on the program and they loved it. So this was just fantastic. Thanks so much for doing this and for your flexibility of making this a webinar. On that. And also, I want to thank a couple of my own teammates. Pamela, wonderful. This is the first time you and I have been through this sort of thing. So excellent job. I don't think we screwed up too badly, did we?
I think we've covered all bases.
Indeed. And the reason for that, I think, is because of Kristen and Caroline, who are also on. So thanks both of you for jumping in right here. This isn't the only webinar that we're going to be doing this week. So appreciate your grace under pressure, as they say. And then I was asked to remind people about our next webinar. Again, it's with Profix, and we did a really interesting CFO survey, and I think you're going to learn a lot from this presentation. It's March 26th, and Kristen, it is at noon Eastern time. Is that correct?
I believe. Yes.
We'll assume it's correct. They usually are. So hopefully you can make time for that. And assuming that we get things under control, I look forward to seeing my friends in Portland on April 14th for creating an award-winning culture. Pamela, if you have a gavel, feel free to bang it. I think we're done.
I think we are done. Thank you so much to Dean Cliff Allen, to Janine Taff, and to Ronelle Marbella. You guys were phenomenal, and I really appreciate your flexibility. And with that, I want to make sure everybody just makes it a great Tuesday. Thanks so much for coming.